The following is an address to the nation by Prime Minister Dr. the Right Honourable Keith Mitchell on the current industrial relations climate.
Fellow Grenadian sisters and brothers, I want to talk to you about the future of our beloved country and about what defines us as a nation. I also want to talk about being reasonable and fair and ensuring social justice for all. These are the things at the core of this ongoing debate about the advance payment of pensions. While I'm Prime Minister at this time, this issue is bigger than me. It is also bigger than the current leaders of the trade unions and staff associations involved in this impasse. But as leaders, the one thing we may have in common is that we all are from the working class backgrounds, with an appreciation of people's yearning for both empowerment and development. We may debate how we achieve this goal, but that debate must never degenerate into meanness, disingenuity, nor the need to score cheap populist points. This is not the long-term interests of this country. And in this debate also, we must not only listen to the people with the loudest voices, but crucially, the people with no voice at all. There is the young man who is still without a job, the single mother hoping for a chance to keep her dignity, the part-time worker with no security and no benefits, the now long-retired elder whose economic circumstances has forced them into homes for the elderly. Ultimately, sisters and brothers, we'll be judged by the fight we fight for the least among us, those without the power or the confidence to champion their own worthy cause, those without the will or the connections to incite. For our nation would not be worthy to hang on to its soul if we do not take into consideration the most vulnerable among us, nor the interests of the generation to come in every decision that we make. Sisters and brothers, that's why, together as a people, we must have a discussion in the context of what is both reasonable and fair, and what is just for all the citizens of this beautiful country. And so, you may ask yourself, what is reasonable? 2 years ago, this government, through its own initiative, felt it was reasonable that public servants, like workers everywhere, should have a pension that can provide for their daily needs when they retire. It was a moral and philosophical position we took, understanding that the restoration and reformation of pension, as desirable as it is, was not necessarily an easy thing, and that it must be affordable and sustainable over the long term. For over 35 years, an entire generation ago, there was no pension for public servants except through the National Insurance Scheme, NIS. Sisters and brothers, successive governments failed to tackle this issue, not because any of them was insensitive to the cause, but because it was extremely difficult to do. Even the very trade unions that are now inflexible in their demands did not tackle this issue. Herbert Blaze, Ben Jones, Nicholas Braffett, George Brazan, Tillman Thomas, and myself in previous terms all failed to get that job done. Let us fast forward to 2018. Government, fully cognizant that NIS alone is not sufficient to give public officers an affordable quality of life, entered into a memorandum of understanding with the public sector trade unions and staff associations to guarantee workers a pension of at least 70%, which is far more than what currently obtains. Sisters and brothers, this memorandum of understanding in principle ushered in the reformation of pensions, pending all final agreements achieved through negotiations. Fellow Grenadians, here is the truth. Government and trade unions have agreed on a formula which states that each public officer will retire with a pension that is not less than 70% of their last salary. The widely spewed narrative that government has somehow gone back on an understanding outlined in this MOU is certainly fake news generated by mischief makers. Government remains fully committed to ensuring that public officers receive a pension of at least 70% of their last salary. The outstanding issue about pension reform, and what is it at the heart of the current impasse, is whether and to what extent government can afford an upfront loan to retiring public officers. That is called an advance payment of pension, what is currently being referred to as gratuity. Whatever the size of that loan or advance payment that is agreed upon by government and the trade unions and staff associations, deductions will be taken out later from the monthly pension payments to repay that loan. Another fact to know, whatever the final loan size and the schedule for repayment at the end of the period, workers will receive all pensions due to them, which is, as we have agreed, is at least 70% of the last salary. Therefore, sisters and brothers, the suggestion that government's inability to give a 25% loan as an advance payment of pension means that workers will lose is totally false. Sisters and brothers, I assure you, government is committed to the pension arrangement and to pay the full agreed amount. Additionally, the suggestion that there is a law somewhere that dictates that government must pay 25% upfront as an advance pension payment or gratuity is absolutely false. In fact, if such a law exists now, the most appropriate course of action would be for the disputing parties to challenge it in a court of law. Here is another fact, sisters and brothers, that there was no breakdown in the negotiations on pension reform. In the negotiations which involve trade unions and staff associations, the Grenada Union of Teachers, GUT, unilaterally walked out on the bargaining process and prematurely called a strike without going through the accepted process of arbitration provided for in the Labor Relations Act. The action was both unfortunate and disappointing, and it spoke to the level of arbitrariness that quite frankly took a negotiating team by surprise. In the spirit of trade unionism, other unions decided to stand in solidarity with GOT. Through all of this, government has consistently voiced a willingness to reopen dialogue, and in every instance we have offered to do so unconditionally. On the other hand, some representing the trade unions have consistently shown that they're more wired for war than a peaceful settlement. The discussions on Friday, November 23rd were a case in point. Some proposals were put on the table. The government's negotiating team stated that a response will be provided Monday after Cabinet has had an opportunity to review. Mere hours later, one union declared 3 more days of strike. Sisters and brothers, this did not show good faith, a premise on which negotiations are conducted. We admire and understand the role of trade unions and the desire to fight for the members. Rightfully, that's their mandate as a bargaining agent representing their membership. Sisters and brothers, this right brings with it a serious responsibility. A responsibility of leaders to lead on issues that confront members in openness, truthfulness, and genuineness in regard to the objective facts and realities. That said, unions must be in turn appreciate that government has a broader mandate, which is to fight to protect all workers, those who are represented by trade unions and those who are not government, but also fight to protect the weak and vulnerable. In short, government must provide social justice for all, not only a select group of persons. There is one national pie, and it is government's duty to share that pie among all its citizens, not just those who work in the public service. Sisters and brothers, government cannot accede to the demands of the 25% gratuity in the current construct, because it means that we'll have to find an average about $21 million annually for what is, in effect, a loan to public sector workers who have been employed in the period post February 22nd, 1985 and December 31st, 2018. Sisters and brothers, it must be noted that the figure of $21 million does not include what will have to be allocated for the so-called unestablished workers who are not confirmed to an established position. Now, when we come to negotiate for these other workers, that figure would balloon into an even larger amount, which will further undermine government's ability to pay, bearing in mind that there are many others depending on us for social justice. Understanding all of this, it brings us to the point of what is fair. Government position is that it is neither reasonable nor fair to make such a demand for a huge loan upfront, and to be also inflexible with it, knowing that such a payment could lead to possible job losses, cuts in services, or imposition of new taxes, impacts that will inevitably reach the wider population. None of these scenarios will benefit anyone and contravenes government's commitment to provide social justice for all. including the public officers who will get an advance pension payment, only to have it snatched from them through the fiscal measures that will become necessary to support the very payment. But sisters and brothers, there's an even greater repercussion. Such a huge payment at this time will put government in breach of the Fiscal Responsibility Act. It will stop us from getting an almost $100 million from the international agencies to invest in our country and its people, which is supposed to come very soon. It would also throw all the sacrifices made by all Grenadians in the last few years down the drain. It will plunge the country into economic crisis. It will create hardships for the people seeking housing assistance, part-time jobs and roads, assistance with tuition and other academic expenses. The Amani trainees, people who depend on social services, including our elders who have served their country well. Sisters and brothers, how can that be socially just? Government will be grossly irresponsible if it accedes to such a request, which will create more problems with more negative, long-standing effects. My dear sisters and brothers, that is why we appeal to people's collective sense of reasonableness and fairness, to a sense of patriotism from the trade union leaders, who have every right to fight for their members, but must not forget the parents of the children they teach, their friends in the community they play ball with, and their old grand aunt. If anything, Grenada's history has taught us that manufactured strife, fueled by an unwillingness to compromise, always hurts the weakest among us and sets us all back. Trade unions must be aware that they are not dealing with a dispute concerning employees in the private sector. The workers who they are bringing out to strike are teachers, nurses, caregivers, and persons who provide various government services. These people do not work to provide a profit to the employer. These people work to ensure that greater public good is enhanced. They give their services so that everyone, especially the children, will be protected and their interests promoted to ensure a better future. Trade unions, therefore, must act responsibly. They must bear in mind that the invaluable services these people perform and who they benefit from these important services. Therefore, sisters and brothers, when it comes to the public service workers, there has to be a different threshold which must be crossed before trade unions call for such drastic action to be taken. A responsible trade union must employ every dispute resolution mechanism available before taking strike action. It must be prepared to engage in a responsible and flexible manner. We sincerely hope that the trade unions will see the good sense of this approach in the interest of the people of Grenada, Carriacou, and Petit Martinique. Government is therefore committed to protecting the public interest, to have our hospitals functioning so that health care can be provided and the lives may be protected and saved. We are committed to ensuring that schools resume normalcy and that education of our children is not jeopardized. We are committed to the public service resuming normalcy, and we are committed to working towards securing the future of all Grenadians, Carriacouians, and Petit Martinicans. There are mechanisms available for the resolution of the present dispute. The trade unions have stayed away from that, preferring to hold the children and the people of this country hostage, with ransom being an unaffordable and unsustainable loan or advance payments of pension. This action cannot be reasonable and it cannot be fair. Government's many efforts have been rebuffed in the last 2 weeks with increasing belligerence. Government has continuously expressed a desire to resolve the impasse, a willingness to renegotiate at the bargaining table, but there must be a similar willingness by the trade unions to return to the table they walked out on and find a solution in the best interest of all Grenada, Carriacou, and Petite Martinique. Sisters and brothers, it is easy to sound the bells of war, where we must answer to a higher calling, to sing the songs of peace, to safeguard the interests of the nation's children. Would we have to set aside pension reform altogether? We genuinely see a need for reform, but it cannot be at the expense of the country's progress or at the expense of our children's education. As it stands now, the nation's children have lost 2 weeks of classroom time in which they would have to have valuable instruction from the teachers. Time lost can never be regained. But sisters and brothers, if this industrial action continues, government is proposing to have learning centers established across the country to provide this critical face-to-face instruction time for students, the future of our country. Furthermore, sisters and brothers, my cabinet colleagues and I, most of whom are former teachers, have all agreed that we'll visit these centers to teach our students. Sisters and brothers, as a former professor of mathematics, I'm prepared to teach mathematics to our children. Minister Gregory Bowen will teach mathematics and physics. Minister Oliver Joseph will teach economics. Minister Pamela Moses is a former English teacher, and she's willing to teach again. Minister Kate Lewis spent more than 17 years teaching. She's prepared to teach the principles of business, accounts, and office administration again. Minister Kendra Maturin Stitt taught history, social studies, and English literature. She's prepared to teach the children of Carriacou again. Minister Clarice Modest Cohen taught English and science. Minister Emmeline Pear and Minister Delma Thomas taught at the primary level, and they too are ready and willing to teach again. Cabinet members who are not teachers are also prepared to assist in these learning centers to ensure that the interests of our students are well served. We are all prepared to sacrifice our time because we simply cannot allow our children to lose any further. Their future is at stake. The future of this country is at stake. We all must listen to the voices of reason that are out there. The leaders of civil society, the business community, and our religious leaders. Sisters and brothers, despite the existing tension in this industrial climate, as Prime Minister, I remain optimistic about the future of Grenada, Carriacou, and Petite Martinique. I'm filled with renewed hope for this beautiful country, as the vast majority of Grenadians have resisted rancor and applied reason. This hope is based on the public officers who continue to dutifully show up for work, the medical professionals who have refused to compromise the care of citizens and visitors alike, the teachers who continue to help students, many of them preparing for examinations, the parents and students who rejected outside agitation. We particularly salute the increasing number of teachers who showed up to work today and who are, by their own actions, signaling to the union leaders to return to good faith negotiations. On behalf of the government and people of this country, and those with smaller voices, and those with no voice at all, we are grateful. As a government, we are committed to the workers' cause. We won't avoid taking difficult decisions, but we promise to be reasonable and fair. That's the least we can promise to you. And this is the only thing we'll ask of all concerned. May God bless you, and may God bless this beautiful nation of Grenada, Carriacou, and Petite Martinique. Thank you.
The preceding was an address to the nation by Prime Minister Dr. the Right Honorable Keith Mitchell on the current industrial relations climate.
Government pension. What are the facts? Are all public workers entitled to pension? Are public workers owed gratuity? Here are the facts. Fact 1. The Pension Disqualification Act of 1983 was validated on April 21, 1985 by the democratically elected government, led by former Prime Minister Herbert A. Blaize. This means that public workers employed after February 22, 1985 are not legally entitled to a pension from the government of Grenada. Fact 2. The judgment in the Hermelin Armstrong case does not create legal precedents for the reinstatement of pension to public workers employed after February 22, 1985. The judgment created a legal precedence only for those workers who joined the public service in a pensionable post between April 4, 1983 and February 22, 1985. There were 56 such workers. The government restored pension to those 56 workers in 2018 at a cost of $7.7 million. Fact 3. All officers employed in a pensionable post who joined the service after February 22, 1985 are not legally entitled to a pension from government. They are only entitled to a pension from NIS once they meet the necessary requirements as per the NIS Act. Fact 4. The Cabinet's decision in 2016 to reform pension is rooted in moral and social justice principles, and it is not a legal obligation. Therefore, any agreement on pension is a win for public workers. Fact 5. The MOU signed between government, the unions, and staff associations in February and March 2018 stated that the pension regime which will be implemented must be affordable and sustainable. Fact 6. The proposed pension regime for public workers employed between February 22, 1985 and December 31, 2018, as stated in the MOU, is a non-contributory pension plan. Therefore, no deductions will be taken from workers' salaries to finance their pension from government. Pensioners also benefit from any future negotiated salary increases. Fact 7. It was agreed by all parties that a worker's annual pension would be a minimum of 70% of their final salary to be paid jointly by the NIS and the government of Grenada. Fact 8. Government is not obligated to offer an advanced pension payment, commonly called a gratuity. Government has proposed to make an advanced pension payment of 2% of full pension, an amount it can practically and reasonably afford given its current and projected revenue stream. It should be noted that an advanced pension payment is a non-interest-bearing loan that the government grants to the pensioner, which must then be repaid in equal monthly installments in the form of a reduced monthly pension over 12.5 years. Fact 9. Under the proposed 2% advanced pension payment or gratuity, retirees will be entitled to a higher monthly pension than if a larger advanced payment was given. Fact 10. If the government accommodates any higher rate of gratuity, the implications would be severe for the country, as this will translate to higher taxes such as VAT, income tax and property tax, higher import duties, the possibility that hundreds of millions of dollars in grants would be lost, lower expenditure in critical areas such as healthcare, agriculture, roadworks and youth development, retrenchment of workers. These are the facts. Government is committed to an amicable resolution to the pension matter for the good of all Grenadians.
Stay up to date with all that's happening with the new National Party, NNP. Send us a message via text or WhatsApp on 405-8683 with your name, email, and constituency. Stay in the know with NNP. Get updated.